right, maybe we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Jim Gall. I'm the host of the Grit City Think and Drink. I'm a professor at the University of Washington, Tacoma, where I have been teaching for 21 years, I guess, at this point. We have a very awesome speaker tonight, somebody I've known for quite a while, so I can't wait to introduce her, but I'll give you a little bit of background about the series. For those of you who are new to the Grit City Think and Drink, this is the 2021 COVID edition. So normally we do this in person at a bar where we can actually see each other, have a drink and enjoy our talk. But taking advantage of the fact that we are all at home, I can bring in some lovely speakers from outside of our normal driving range. And so Charlene's coming to us today from Alaska. So I'm very grateful to take advantage of that. But the Grit City Think and Drink happens every second Tuesday of the month. So you can put it on your calendar and come back and check it out. We try to cover topics of all sorts, everything. I'm a scientist, a scientist and engineer, but I enjoy all sorts of new things to learn. So we have humanities, social sciences, all sorts of things that we cover during this talk series. So I hope you'll come back and check it out. The Grit City Think and Drink website you probably went to get access to this event. You can check out the events. Will get posted there as they come up, so you can see what's coming up down the line. But I will show you the screen that you're seeing right now. Our next talk is March 9th, second Tuesday of March. Julian Olden is a professor up at UW in fisheries, and he's going to talk about fish as more than a meal. He's a collaborator of mine who's worked on some other projects, but a pretty interesting talk for sure. So I hope you'll come for that. But coming up, all of 2021 is now scheduled at this point. So we'll be getting those talks up. Coming up in the 3 months after that, we have one person talking about sustainability in food from UCLA. We have another person talking about masculinity and Trump, which ought to be an interesting talk. I'm totally blanking on what the other one is. So you'll have to tune in and see what else is coming down the line, but I hope you'll join us. The way that this runs is that I'll introduce Charlene. She'll give an amazing talk. And then after that, we'll give away some prizes. We have some, we're not in person, so I mail them to you. So you're gonna have to actually give me your address so I can get them to you. But we have Grit City Think and Drink socks is what we're giving away at the moment. We've given away shirts, we've given away hats, we're down to socks. Underwear is obviously next. And so stay tuned for 2022. Hope that you will join us then. But we'll give away through some schlocky means some random winners for socks that we'll mail to you. And then Charlene will take questions from you. And the way to do that is to chat. So if you haven't used Zoom before, if you go to, I think it should be, depends on your computer, but right now it's at the top of your screen. It'll say chat or it'll say more. If you click on that, you'll find chat. You then can send in your questions towards the end of Charlene's talk, and I will call out the questions to Charlene, and you can play Stump the Speaker at that point. So hopefully that will all go smoothly, but we'll see how it all goes. Also, in case I forget, if you happen to win the socks, the way to get those to you is that you chat your address, mailing address to me, and whether you wear small or medium large socks. I am the only one who can see that, so that doesn't go out to anybody else, just so you know, and we'll get you the socks. So it's the only way we can do it. So without further ado, I will stop sharing my screen and I will introduce our speaker today. Charlene is Iñupiaq, and her family is from White Mountain and Golovin, Alaska. She is mother of Evan Lukluan. Charlene who turned 6 yesterday, by the way, I should point out. Charlene has served in many spaces as an advocate for Indigenous women, Indigenous sovereignty, climate justice, and Indigenous rights to health and well-being. Charlene is a lifelong learner in both her cultural traditions and decolonizing academia. She earned her BA in American Ethnic Studies with a minor in Gender, Women, and Sexuality Studies from the University of Washington. where I got to know her through a class that we had together. An MA in Alaska Native Studies and Rural Development, and is currently a PhD candidate due to defend in March in Indigenous Studies at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Charlene gratefully resides in Anchorage on the territories of the Dena'ina peoples. She has taught the Iñupiaq language and is part of, Kingikmuit dance group with her son. So without further ado, I give you our speaker, Charlene Apok.
Koyana, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for spending your time with me. I'm really excited to share, and I actually look more forward to the discussion afterwards. But thank you, Jim, and I'm going to share my screen here also for my introduction. And so hopefully you're seeing my screen. There we go.
You're good.
Cool. So like Jim said, Uvanga Charlene Apok Nupaxis ka Aqpik, Jinik Milgurunga, Sulina Chervek Milgurunga, Akaga Sandra Baby Lu Apok, Ich Naga Evan Lukluan, Savaktunga Native Movement Me, Suli Data for Indigenous Justice Me. So I am Iñupiaq, and it's always important to introduce ourselves and who we are, because we always carry our relationships. My family in the pictures here, you'll see the shot from the airplane is one of the villages my family is from. And each of those villages, White Mountain and Golovin, have less than 200 people, and it's in the Bering Straits of Alaska. I personally think it's the most beautiful place on earth. And then my mother, Sandra Baby Lu Apok, and then that's my son's son. I am a language learner of the Iñupiaq language, and I practice our traditional dances and songs with the Kingikmuit dance group. I want to share that, Jim reached out to me, and we met in, I think, 2012, 2011. It's been a while. And I was fortunate to be in an environmental science class that happened to take place in Kenya with Jim. And fast forwarding to this year, Jim reached out and asked if I'd be willing to do a talk because some of the work that I do is in climate change and advocacy. So I've done fellowships at the United Nations and various things like that as related to health policy and health and well-being in the Arctic. However, being given the choice to share on many possible topics, I was really thinking about this, and it made a lot of sense to actually share about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And the reason I decided to go with that topic is because when I was in Kenya with Jim, not when we were cell phone savvy like we are today. I didn't have a smartphone there, but when we were over there, it was actually February, so the month that we're in right now. And I got a call, well, Jim got a call from the shared phone that we were sharing for emergencies only. And it was news that my cousin had gone missing. And at the time, I was way over in Kenya, halfway around the world from my home, and not able to plug into Facebook and things like we do now. And I finished my trip in Kenya and had a wonderful learning experience. I learned a ton there. But I went immediately home to Alaska to try to find my cousin. And so as I thought about this invite and this time to share, I wanted to tie it together because it was something that happened when I was with Jim. And of course, he's very compassionate and offered lots of support for me during that time. But when I did return home, if you are familiar, or if you ever follow Alaska news, my cousin was Samantha Koenig, and she was a barista in Alaska. and she was kidnapped from her work at a barista stand, and my family couldn't find her. And so when I returned from Kenya, I came home, and it ends up that she ended up being murdered. And in this case, in this particular story I'm sharing from my own family, you know, we were able to find out who did it. They were prosecuted and charged. But that's a very rare coincidence that we actually received that much justice in Alaska. And so I wanted to share a little bit about what's happening across our Indigenous communities, and share my personal story in relationship to it, because unfortunately it's a story that many people up here and in the lower 48 share.
Mom, there's not enough snow to make a maze, and there's no hill to use my inner tube.
Okay, you can use it however you like you were sliding yesterday, okay? Pardon me. He is playing in fresh snow. But hold on.
So I'd rather feel like
Okay. But I did still want to share a little bit about Indigenous gender constructs as was advertised. So no false advertising here, because it is the foundation of the work that I do. And so oftentimes there's a whole nother presentation on Indigenous gender concepts, and in particular Indigenous feminisms, that I had started preparing before I decided to change route. But the concept here is that we believe in life-giving forces and all sacred life-giving forces, including lands, waters, and bodies. And we have a very fluid concept of all genders. And a long time actually at UW, I was asked to give a presentation, and I was like, well, what's the best way to explain it? Was like an amoeba. This is my idea of genders. So in short, that's a concept of genders, and we work between that, but we always honor people's sacred and highest beings. My dissertation I'm defending coming up on March 1st is actually on Indigenous Masculinities. And again, that could be a whole nother separate presentation. But what this means for Indigenous gender concepts and how I work with them every single day, and the topic that I wanted to share with you all is that women are sacred, and that they give life to us as human beings, and that the water that carries children is sacred, and the land and that sustains us is sacred. And so we are protectors of all of those things. And this is just some of the beautiful pictures of our community coming together. And then this one particularly is from Inuit culture, or can you see my pointer? Whoops. Where our creation stories, the babies were literally given to us from the sentient earth. And so life really comes from the earth. And so we as Indigenous people, when we say we're from a certain place and that we're from that land, we mean it literally from our origin stories. And what that looks like is when women, particularly in our communities, are facing harm of any sort, I and others in our community stand and work to protect them. And so missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, you'll often see an acronym MMIWG, is a crisis that's rooted in colonization and the impacts that we faced from things like our worldviews and our social society around things like gender going under immense change. And so this is an issue not only in Alaska, but all over Indigenous communities. And this is some of the information from Urban Indian Health Institute. And I hope, and actually down there in Seattle and in Washington, there's a lot of amazing advocacy happening out of Urban Indian Health Institute that I just wanted to also share with you all as you're possibly tuning in from Washington. A quick overview. This is a very complex matter, but again, it's rooted in colonization and racism and sexism and the patriarchy. But this is a crisis that we're facing across many of our communities, and it's so complex that there's so many pieces to it. And we only have a short amount of time here. So I won't go too deep into it, but my background is I'm a health researcher. And so I kind of nerd out when it comes to more of the data pieces. Some of the problems are that we lack protections, both systemically with law enforcement. We have many communities up here in Alaska that don't even have law enforcement. There's also not mandatory reporting on behalf of agencies that they aren't required to track it. So there's a huge lack of data, and that's kind of what I am addressing. This one gap is the data piece. And then also we're missing in media. So the fact that many people don't know what missing and murdered Indigenous women or the MMIWG stands for is an issue. And so we have women who go missing all the time and they aren't even covered in media, and really horrific stories that are really sad, but again, go unnoticed and not talked about. So the data, again, being my background as a researcher, we know that there wasn't, a couple years ago, when we held a rally to call attention to this in Alaska, we wanted to find a list of names to read out of our loved ones. And we found that there was no list, and that this is where we started unpacking some of these pieces. And so we took it upon ourselves a couple of years ago to develop our own database. But when I start talking about the data piece, it's always important to know that every number in data represents a loved one, much like I shared at the beginning of this presentation, and that kind of story is behind every single figure that we share and that we are talking about. So we always remember that when we talk about numbers, and not to desensitize. And you'll see this slide with all of the faces, many faces of our women, and to remember that part of who they are and their memory. So as I shared a couple years ago, and this is a piece of art that was done when we were first putting the names together for Alaska, and we put them on a map, and our community came together and just started sharing names with us. And again, you would think that law enforcement would have like a quick data pull for this, and they don't, because they're not required to. And so it's very hard to find. And so we did it at a grassroots organization and started doing this. And then in 2020, I incorporated Data for Indigenous Justice, which is a nonprofit that homes the database now and does the tracking. And we just released our report. Last week, we gave it to Tribes First. We did a tiered release. And so I manually track, and I could talk about the methods, that's a whole nother conversation. But right now we have 229 cases just in Alaska of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And that is only what is documented. And again, that's only what is known. That's very surface level. And as I anticipate addressing many of the other gaps, these figures, I believe, are in the thousands, to be honest. But our report I just released the report last Tuesday. It went to Tribes First. Today it goes to nonprofits and NGOs for their advocacy and use, and then it will be available publicly on my website. And then data for Indigenous justice, and the piece that I work on particularly with data, is part of a working group that we've worked together over the last couple of years to address this in the state from a grassroots level. And so we don't do direct services, but what we do is we try to look at systems level change. So, right, we've put up forward policy the last couple of years. We do lunch and learns, policy forums. I am kind of leading in the data front for this. We have, then we have community events, and we really try to do this in a healing centered way, knowing that this is a really hard topic for our people. And if we're going to work towards justice, we need them to be healthy and well. And so we prioritize and put our healing first. So often at the beginning of the year, we hold vigils for our community, and we bring them together in a good way. We often also like to eat together and really come together. So that's been a little bit hard for us, but we've adjusted. We do 5K awareness runs. Our last one, we had over 500 people register, and people participated even internationally. It was really touching. We have done art shows, and then we do self-defense and awareness trainings for our community as well. So lots and lots of ways that we're addressing this in our communities and working together. And I wanted to honor and recognize some of the people who are doing this. I represent one of many people on the front lines who are doing amazing work. I work at Native Movement, and then we partner with Native People's Action. I'm the executive director of Data for Indigenous Justice. And we also work with the Alaska Native Heritage Center and the Women's Resource Center. And these are other organizations here that you can look into. That you have the websites here. We're also pretty active on social media, Facebook and Instagram and whatnot, and give out updates there. But I kind of sped through that because it is so much. I want to give an opportunity really to, if there's certain areas that you're interested in, if you want to know more about policy that we've put forward, or how, methods for the data, or more about the community healing spaces that we do, I'm more than happy to share on any of those fronts. So I kind of high pointed, and am really looking forward to the discussion, but I'll stop screen sharing. Mm-hmm. Yes, son.
Thank you very much, Charlene. So we have plenty of time for questions. So maybe what we'll do is that we'll take some questions to start with, and then we'll take a break at some point and give away some swag, and then potentially continue on with those questions. So if you have questions, please chat them in there, and I will relay them to Charlene. I'll start you off while people are, because I can actually see one face at least that looks like they're typing. So my question for you is that you've collected all this data on the cases. Is there like an overall, I hate to say it, but perpetrator? Like who is the people that are doing this stuff of the cases that is actually data on?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So one of the data fields is the outcomes of the cases. It's often not filled out. So largely though, taking a step back for what is known and what data and research is available about violence in Alaska Native and American Indian communities, there's a ton of documented research about the rates of violence that we face. And again, that's nothing new. There is research available. I think it was from, well, no, I don't want to misspeak, but there has been research shown that largely perpetrators of violence against American Indian and Alaska Native women are non-Native males. And so, Mom, when's dinner? When I'm done. And actually, one of the reasons that I personally work in masculinities and decide to do my dissertation on that front is I actually really believe in the healing of all people and to return to gender balance, and that the framework of Indigenous gender constructs is one for everybody, not just for Indigenous people, and that it offers a way of being that's holistic, and that masculinity.
Mom, can I listen to Molly now?
Not right now. That masculinity from a Western perspective is very damaging, not just to women, but it's also not good for men. I believe that it's harmful to men. And so, again, like I think, although yes, largely perpetrators are men, I believe that we also need healing spaces for men as well. So.
Thank you. We have a question from Gail. She asks, what interventions do you use to help women heal from the trauma?
Yeah, so one of the ones that is coming up in May is we have an awareness day, but we hold a vigil for our community to honor their missing loved ones. And we've done smaller ones as needed by only request of the community. I think that's important to say. I don't just, go and pick and do it. They ask us. And at the healing of the drums, we do a community drumming. No. I told you I cooked dinner afterwards. We do a drum ceremony, we do candle vigils, and also at those we do crafts and art events so that people can bead. We've done painting, we've done talking circles facilitated by professional behavioral health specialists in our tribal health care system. So it's looked like many things. We've also done trainings and things like that, so that people feel stronger. I really love our self-defense and awareness trainings that we've offered. And so it's looked like many different things, but we do always try to make that time and space for healing with our people so that we can do this in a good and sustainable way, because it is such heavy heart work.
Let's see, sorry, I've lost my stuff here. Ashley asks, thank you for the presentation and update on your progress around the report. How can those of us in the lower 48 help be allies to the communities in Alaska? What are the pathways for this that make sense for BIPOC and white allies?
Thank you so much for asking that. So, locally, if you can, support the local communities that you're in, because there are many communities who are starting to self-determine and address this in very different ways. So what we're doing up here in Alaska might not be the approach that's happening down there in those communities or in other places. And even within Alaska, to be honest, we have some communities that really want to look at their tribal courts. We have other communities who are taking a hard look at law enforcement, or, I work again more on a grassroots front. And so we have a lot more, I'd say, creative. we can do, I feel like I have a lot more flexibility than some spaces, but we do get a lot of asks about how can I be supportive? And so I really believe in everybody being a part of the solution, which is why I want to also share here in this space, is to raise awareness and then find ways of being supportive. And so sometimes I feel like our most powerful spaces are our ones with our family and our friends, and speaking up and talking about it where it's most hard to talk about it, and challenge these notions, whether it's about gender or about violence or about victim blaming that happens, and to really have those, be willing to have those hard conversations in our families and or at school, wherever, or where you work, if it comes up. If you're able to speak up and stay safe, I think that that's a really powerful way of taking action. There's also calls for action. So some of them might be, we've done calls for action to flood our state troopers with FOIA requests. And that was a very effective way for me to reclaim data. And anyone could be involved in things like that. We've asked for, you know, people to come to rallies or to stand with Indigenous people. And oftentimes, if you're in a place of power or privilege, that means giving up space that you have and maybe having someone else go to something, or you support them being there instead of yourself. And so sometimes that's been met with a little bit of resistance because people say, I want to help. And then you say how they can help. And then that actually means maybe giving away a little bit of power, and then they don't want to help anymore. And then, you know, of course, we do always ask, you know, if people want to donate money to the causes and the funds, that is always appropriate too, because there's people who are working and doing this. You know, I've done this program. I ran my gender justice program out of Native movement with no funds in my program for 3 years. So I put on a vigil last February for over 300 people in my community with no money. And that's because women labored and we cooked pots of soup and fed 300 people and brought them together. And so, you know, we always take donations.
On 300, you better.
And I think it's well known that grad students have lots of expendable cash. So that's obviously what's going on. We'll ask one more question and then we'll take a quick break, and then we have a whole slew of questions lined up for you. So Leanne asks, to follow up on Jim's question, can you talk about the policy side of addressing the problem?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I have been in meetings. It's heavy meetings on policy right now because our legislative session is kicking up here. And so we've put forward, first of all, we asked our governor for some budget allocations for the last couple of years without a response. And this year, we actually got a response from the Department of Public Safety, but it was literally the day before the budget was going to be announced. And there was not a lot of room for, from their perspective, to make budget. So, you know, political will is really shown where people are willing to put their dollars. However, that doesn't mean we can't move forward. So we've put forward some bills that ask for many different things. Our strategy changed this year. So last year we went and we met with different representatives who might be willing to put our bill forward. And they ended up putting forward a little bit of a watered down bill that didn't have as many of the things that we wanted. And so this year, what we decided to do is we decided to put all of our wants into the bill that we could possibly dream and ask for, and then just really flood and see who will pick it up. So we're trying a different strategy, but some of those ask for the policy. One, I want to say Arizona is doing great stuff.
Mom,
for
where my dad lives?
Mm-hmm.
Yay!
Arizona is
Good,
doing
good,
great
good.
stuff on the legal front. And then again, so is Washington and Montana. So kind of some active states as well.
Good, good, good.
Some of the things that we're asking for is to have law enforcement have it be mandated that they have to report to data systems, particularly federal databases, such as there's one called NAMUS that almost actually lost funding. That was kind of scary. So we're trying to mandate data reporting. We're trying to ask for funds. Up here, we have a village. We have different tiers of law enforcement, but we're trying to get funds so that tribes can hire their VPSOs, they're called. We're trying to get cultural training for law enforcement, all law enforcement up here. And that's actually seems real easy. And it's not. We've asked for streamlined in mandatory data collection around race and ethnicity. So there's quite a few things. Those are the ones that come to the top of my head right now. But again, it's been met with a lot of resistance. We have a lot of reps who are allies, but right now, at least up here in Alaska, it's looking maybe not like the best year that we're gonna have too much success, but we'll keep trying. But yeah, I can also, during break, pull up my draft of my bill that I have on my desktop and give you more specifics, but those are kind of the things that we're asking for. Oh, Jim, you're on mute. Jim, you're on mute. You're talking away. Jim, we can't hear you.
Jim will unmute himself because he hasn't been doing quite enough Zoom meetings to figure out that, you know, don't mute yourself. So again, because I didn't say any of that to any of you, we're going to give away some Thinking Drake socks. You didn't hear anything about Gail either. Gail, a person who asked the question earlier, said that she's currently a student at UW doing their capstone on MMIWG. So very cool to continue that work. What I was trying to say was we're going to take a break and give away some socks so that you can remember to come back whenever you see your socks, to come back and learn some new things from all these amazing speakers that we have. So we'll give away those right now. So this is the way it's going to work. So have your chat open. And what you want to do is chat. I'm going to give you one question, and then these both have number answers. So the person that gets closest to the number wins. First question is, how far is it from Alaska to Russia? What's the closest distance between Alaska and Russia? Chat your answer. And if you don't know, just guess. Let's see, I have 2936. Oh, sorry, miles is fine. Otherwise, I have to convert 35 miles, 579, 500. I can see Russia from my window. Thank you, Linda. Yes, that's a good one. 1,035 miles. Anybody else got any guess? All right, we got a 78. I think if I'm doing my math correctly, Jennifer, who had 35, wins. The distance is actually 55 miles is the closest distance. Now I'm going off of Google, so that could be totally wrong, but hey, we're gonna go with the Googles on this one. So 55 miles. So Jennifer, if you want to send me your info, your mailing info, I will, and whether you are small/medium or medium/large, and I think these are unisex, so ergo they are actually men's sizes. I don't know what unisex really means in socks, so they're kind of larger. So send me your info and I'll get you that pair of socks. Second question, everybody ready? Somebody thought it was 3,000 miles. That's awesome, between Alaska and Russia. So second question is, what is the average snowfall of Golovin, Alaska? What is the average snowfall in inches? So I don't have to convert from any of that metric stuff. How many inches of snow do they get on average in Golovin?
I don't even know.
5 feet I have. Anybody else? Everybody else is Googling the answer right now is what's going on. 200 inches, 37, 2 inches. Wow, it's a dry place in Alaska. 25, so we got the 25 feet, 48 inches. This is so hard. there is no penalty to getting it wrong. Just so you know, I'm the only one that can tell who's guessing what, just so you can tell. So the actual answer is 76 inches. So it looks like Anthony actually wins this one. So Anthony, congratulations. Congratulations to Jennifer as well. Again, if you guys can please, I see Jennifer's information. So if you could please, Anthony, send me your info and what size socks you wear, and I will get you those anon when I get a chance to safely mask up and go to a post office when there's not 5,000 people out the door. So, so we will continue with our question and answer if Charlene's ready. All right, let me go back above the numbers and get back to the questions. So Jennifer asks, the person who just won the socks, thank you for sharing your story. My first question concerned how your efforts are being received by the non-Native communities. Has law enforcement been responsive?
Yeah, excellent question. So yes and no. I live here on Dena'ina lands in Anchorage, which is the city. I'm fortunate to work with APD, the Anchorage Police Department, and right now our current chief of police is an ally. So I first started meeting with him a couple years ago because again, they also hadn't heard of the issue. And so I came in with literally a list of questions and he actually stayed with me for over 2 hours and let me ask all those questions. And they are hard, you know, I don't really let them often when I ask these questions. And so I started developing a relationship locally with our police department, and my personal and our strategy appears, again, very different. It can look different in different communities. But I really believe in relationship building. And so I went into that meeting and I asked them who they were as people, who they are outside of their uniform. And I asked them about their kids and I asked them about their hobbies. And it was really interesting because I'm sitting there with the chief of police and, you know, other higher ranking law enforcement, and they were learning things about each other that they hadn't ever learned and that they didn't know, because they never took the time to do that and they'd worked together for over 20 years. And so I really walked into the first meetings with law enforcement with the intention to build a relationship, believing, and sometimes I doubt myself, but I do believe that it's the best way to do it and to come together as people first. And with that, I do have a good working relationship with my local police department. It's still hard, it's really hard. But I am able to request data, particularly with this law enforcement agency. They let me attend the cultural trainings and I'm able to give feedback. So I've made a lot of progress here locally with the leadership that we have right now. However, opposite of that, I have tried to work with our Alaska State Troopers and they are super resistant. It's unbelievably, it's ugly. Like I was so heated with someone who manages their database. And I said, you wouldn't believe it, but I was like, I actually don't like asking you all these questions like this. I was like, I really do, like, you wouldn't believe, but this is not my cultural way to even be so confrontational. Like, we're supposed to avoid conflict in my culture. So this is way out of my comfort zone. But, you know, we've had a really, really hard time with other agencies. And I've actually gotten nowhere with them. They decline my FOIA requests all the time. And they won't collaborate, they won't share information, and they stand by, you know, all of their colonial reasons for not working together. And then from my home region, again, I'm from the Bering Straits. And if you do a quick search about the Nome police, you will find that they are being sued by ACLU because they've straight up haven't investigated things like sexual assault cases. They have they're being sued because of lack of action. And that my home region is also really struggling with their police department. So it looks different across the state. Sometimes we get somewhere, sometimes we don't. But I'm thankful for at least the one agency that I am able to partner with. And I believe that they really do want to do a better job. But again, we need, one of the big asks is that they cross-coordinate across all law enforcement agencies in the state. A very simple example, I did an interview earlier with the news today, and they're like, well, what do you mean one size fits all for everybody? And I was like, absolutely not. One size does not fit all. But a very simple example that drives me insane is that if someone goes missing in our state, we have no standard protocol if families and communities are supposed to wait 24 hours, if they're not, if they can report immediately. And again, so like locally, it says in their policy that the community members can report anytime they have a concern for their loved one. They don't have to wait a certain amount. And then in different parts of the state, it's different, or they don't have a policy on it at all. And so one of my very, very simple asks is, please come together, choose one way that works for our communities so that we can at least know, even just for something simple like that isn't coordinated. And so again, even that one ask, they can't put their egos aside and make a shared protocol. It's mind-blowingly frustrating. But again, like I was able to tease it out with my local police department. Then we put it on social media. Hey, for Anchorage, you know, and I told them we're an asset to you too. If you share these kinds of things, I can tell my community about these processes so that they know what to expect if something happens, you know, let me be an asset. And so, you know, it looks different across the state. Sometimes it's going really good and sometimes we're not getting anywhere.
Unfortunately, I think most states are actually in the same boat. It's probably very different depending on where you are in Washington state, just like it is in Alaska. No excuse, it's just unfortunately similar. Dustin asks, I'm interested in knowing whether Alaska has moved toward passing any legislative measures to address this crisis, similar to local measures House Bill 2951/1713 in Washington. It seems like a lot of old legislation still exists that create barriers to justice in a variety of ways. I took a class where we covered MMIWG and was shocked to have never heard of this issue prior to that experience.
Yeah, actually Washington put forward some of the first things that we were able to mobilize off of. So actually really uplift my hands to Abigail Aqpik down there and her teams. So for example, some of the language that was used down in Washington is what I based some of my resolutions on up here. We have a conglomeration called the Alaska Federation of Natives, and I was able to pass a resolution there. And then I was able to pass a local resolution with the municipality of Anchorage the last 2 years. And so, yes, there's some language that has been useful, and particularly for data. So Abigail Aqpik is actually on my board for Data for Indigenous Justice. And so I'm very thankful for her mentorship. My other board members I also should recognize are Malia Villegas, who was previously at the National Congress of American Indians and the policy section there. And so she has a policy background. And then my other board member is actually a previous law enforcement, and she's an Alaska Native woman who used to serve in law enforcement and has since left. But anyhow, their backgrounds are incredibly valuable to me. And then we drafted our own legislation up here. And again, it's moving as fast as molasses. But we have continued to try to push it forward. It's especially hard this year, I'll say, with COVID, because normally, like, again, as an organizer, 10 minutes. one of our strategies is to send in people, right? Just have bodies be lining up in the halls and grabbing people, and we can't do that. So we're trying to re-strategize here, and it's a little tricky. So we'll see how it goes.
Let's see. So Linda asks, any ideas, theories, hypotheses regarding the rising prevalence of violence against Indigenous women?
Yeah, so I actually, I believe that this has been going on since colonization, and that just the documentation, the awareness that it is coming to light is what's really happening. It's not rising. And so when we have cases, or even as I do my baseline reports, I frame it in a very specific way that these aren't like cases. So the last report that was available for Alaska had 52, and that was just a year and a half ago. In 1 year that I've been able to track, we have 229. And I still have multiple databases that I need to cross-reference and keep going, right? And it isn't that it's rising, it's that we're actually documenting it, the rates of violence that we're facing, unfortunately. And I really believe that that's a difference in Indigenous methodologies too, right? Is that we know that the things that our communities share with us, and all the stories that I've been told, and then all the stories that I live, that is true, and that is data. And just because it doesn't exist.
Before you make a dinner, when you're done with your meeting, before you make it, let's play chess.
Okay. He's learning chess. Yes, chess. But yeah, that it isn't growing, and that, of course I lost my train of thought, but generally you got the point.
That's okay. Cindy asks, what's the status of Savannah's Act, a federal bill that directs the Department of Justice to review, revise, and develop law enforcement and justice protocols to address missing and murdered Indians?
Yes, so that was a big deal. And the biggest takeaway from Savannah's Act, and it's different for a couple states such as Alaska, California, Wisconsin, who else am I missing? The PL 280 states. It's going to be a little different. And I think that jurisdiction needs its own report. Jurisdiction is I get myself confused trying to navigate it. But for Savannah's Act, the biggest takeaway is that the federal agencies will hopefully start to have data on this, which again, right, in theory, it trickles down to states and then local, and then they have to report. I'm not sure, how long that's going to take. But for us in Alaska, one of the cool pieces about Savannah's Act is that tribes can use the framework that the federal agencies are putting forward for data collection, but they don't have to, right? We're our own governments, we are sovereign. They can put forward their own, in theory. No one's done it yet. It just passed, and I think people are starting to actually try to understand what it means, particularly in PL 280 states. But that is actually a space that I think could be used really well, particularly for data in tribes.
Gotcha. Right. Jim asks, why isn't law enforcement more engaged? Reasons beyond sexism? ? Percentage of women employed in law enforcement agencies in Indigenous areas?
Right. ? Yeah. So the big one that I get from the state troopers when I say that Alaska Native and American Indian women are facing disproportionate rates of violence, something needs to be done about this. They say we are treating everybody the same. We don't need to do this, right? Because what it would do when they acknowledge disproportionate rates of any group, it means that they are treating a group differently, and then it holds them accountable, right? It implicitly means that they have to do something different. And so the stance for the state troopers and probably the state patrol down there, from what I've heard, is that they continually, they're on the defense all the time, right? And for them to acknowledge disproportionate rates means that they have to do something different. And that was exactly what I went into my meeting with our police department here, was I was like, and they immediately tried to say the same thing. And I said, but disproportionate rates over time show a system issue. And I'm not going to stop asking these questions until I see those rates change. Tell me otherwise. You know, and so that was how I navigated that, and they did. And so that's where we're at, and they actually recognized it in those resolutions, right? And so then it starts to hold those systems accountable, and we build off of those. But that's the biggest reason, is because if they acknowledge disproportionate rates for any group of any kind of violence, then they have to do something different. And so they often won't even get past that first step and recognize it.
Well, we're just about at the end here, but I have Jennifer, who won the socks. She wanted to point out that she's also a student at the UW School of Law, where she is studying Indigenous law. So you have a set of groupies going on today. It's awesome. People working on the same topics, which is wonderful. But more importantly, she asks at the end, I would like to send some money I've saved by not commuting to school. So I think we all have that, just so you know. Where would I send it to? So you want to give a plug for where to donate?
I do. Yeah. Yay for going to law school. I kind of, as I've been doing this work, I was like, oh my gosh, I needed a law degree yesterday. And I told my board, I was like, I need a little lawyer on my shoulder all the time. I really, so I'm awesome for you. But my website is dataforindigenousjustice.com, and I can type it in the chat. But yeah, thank you for any small donation matters. Again, we were even homing and doing this work for years before I incorporated. And I just incorporated, I don't know why I thought, hey, we're in a pandemic. I'm going to school and working full-time from home. Let's incorporate. So I did that during like hunker down. I don't know what happened, but yeah, so we officialized ourselves in 2020.
Well, I want to say thank you in a language that you and I both understand, Sante Sana Mwalimu. For those of you, that's Swahili, since that's where we actually met each other. For thank you very much, teacher. I could call her Mzee, which most of the time means wise person, but it also means old person. So it doesn't quite work the same way in this case, but it definitely applies in this. So big virtual thank you to Charlene for coming in and taking time away from her chess game with her son to give us an awesome talk and to teach us something new. We really appreciate it. It's really good to see you. Thank you everybody for coming. We'll hope to see you in March 9th, and hear all about the other ways that fish are used. And thank you all. Have a wonderful evening. And it looks like I have everybody's info for the socks. So come back and win your socks next time, folks.
Koyana, thank you so much. Thank you for all the questions and listening. Take good care.
Thank you, Charlene. Bye. Take care.
Bye.
Good night. Bye, Lukluan.
Bye.
Happy birthday.